micrograms per liter, which I was trying to say was 15 micrograms per liter is like in a quart, in 2 quarts, it's like a couple of grains of salt in 2 quarts of water. That's 15 micrograms. And then when you go down to 500 nanograms per liter, it's like 1 grain or a half a grain in 2 quarts of water. That's the kind of levels that they're talking about. The 15 is really high, because don't forget, hormones in the body are less, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but are less than 0.5 micrograms per liter. They're very low because they're very potent, the natural occurring hormones in our bodies. And so these levels of 15 micrograms per liter and 0.5 micrograms per liter interfere with what the hormones actions do on our bodies. So this is a quick diagram of how the cadmium gets into our body. If you're eating produce that is grown in yards or gardens where there's cadmium contamination, obviously the food ingestion, breathing air which has got cadmium, it enters. These are the bronchioles. As the bronchioles here goes to the bronchioles, this is the alveoli here, or alveoli, and it actually will traverse the membrane in the lungs and will bind to the hemoglobin or the heme in the red blood cell. And there's also absorption through the skin. I don't see it actually mentioned here, but there is some skin absorption of cadmium. So it can enter through 3 or 4 ways into your body if there's any levels of contamination that are high in the vicinity. And this is, so once it enters the blood, it can go to the liver. And actually what cadmium does, it binds to proteins. So the proteins in the blood, there are specific ones, but in general, there is some binding. It'll bind and release and bind and release. And so for example, albumin, which is egg, if you boil an egg, you see it turns white. Well, the egg white is all albumin. That's 100% protein. So to give you an idea, the cadmium can bind to the protein. It can actually reach the liver and can cause necrosis and hepatocyte. So destruction of the liver, in other words. And the kidney, because it competes with things like calcium and other essential minerals in the body, it does actually cause difficulties in the liver, and you will start seeing proteinuria, which is protein. You should never have protein in your urine. So it'll actually the kidney will start breaking down and start releasing protein into your urine. So, and then obviously the lungs, as I mentioned, this is cadmium. Cysteine is an amino acid. It's a sulfur-containing amino acid. So when it binds, it'll bind to the sulfur portion. I think there's 4, from what I can remember from the Dark Ages. There's 4 sulfur-containing amino acids. Cysteine is one of them, and it'll bind specifically to that. And so it's carried around from the lungs into the blood, bound to cysteine. And then absorption, as I mentioned, it absorbs through the skin. It's quite dangerous. I think it also forms some skin problems. Once it enters the skin, there is some skin problems as well. And then also through the GI, through your stomach and through your intestines, there is some absorption through that way. It does form metal complexes with endocytosis, and there's protein, another way of protein binding, and then it will be excreted in the urine and feces. Now, the thing about the kidney is that in cadmium in general, is that once it gets to the kidney, it does not get excreted exclusively. It will hang around, and it'll hang around for like 10 years. So it's in that respect, if you have repeated exposures over a period of time, it can start building up, and I will start and then stay there. So it's potentially very dangerous. The respiratory system, it affects, well, I mentioned inhalation of cadmium contaminated air. You get shortness of blood, of breath, lung edema, so you start getting fluid in your lungs, destruction of the mucous membrane. So all the linings of your nose, your mouth will start. I mean, they don't totally break down, but you do get irritation of the mucous membranes, and then you get cadmium-induced pneumonitis, which is infection of the lungs, and so you'll start coughing, and you'll start getting some severe chest infections there. And then if you intake of cadmium-contaminated food, you get acute GI effects. You get vomiting, diarrhea, and so if you're not careful, it can lead to quite a severe condition if it's not treated properly. The kidney damage, as I mentioned, patients will go on dialysis because it's irreversible after they've been exposed to cadmium for a long periods of time. It has been shown to affect the reproductive system. So steroidogenic pathways, this is the body's the biosynthesis. So it's the natural production of steroid hormones by the body. And as I mentioned, cadmium does interfere with the steroidogenesis. It does have an estrogenic effect, which is the estrogen is the female sex hormone, so it does interfere with that. There is shown that if pregnant women have been are associated with cadmium, they do produce low birth weight infants or have an increase in spontaneous abortion. So there is an effect on the maternal circulation as well. So it's quite nasty there. And then we've shown that in rats, because it has an estrogenic effect, it does enhance mammary development and increase uterine weight. So some of these studies, they can only be, I mean, we can only do the after effect in adults where they've been exposed to cadmium levels over a period of time. But if you're going to study this in the lab, then you will have, it's unfortunately have to use animals and put it in their drinking water or something like that and show exposure that way. And then you can show the development of different problems in the animal and show that it has an adverse effect. So the several studies have shown to connection between cadmium and bone damage because it interferes with calcium uptake and calcium, if you like, turnover. So that means the calcium that's been taken up by the body and that's excreted. Once cadmium's involved, then you're going to get interference of calcium itself. And so you're going to start to see brittle bones and other conditions that are associated with older people that you might start seeing in younger people. So you see it in several organ systems. The pneumonitis is what I've mentioned, destruction of the mucous membrane. The proteinuria in kidneys, that's the protein that you see in urine. And because of the interference of calcium reabsorption, the cadmium binds specifically in the kidney. So you start seeing the development of kidney stones. The glomerulus, which is the filtration apparatus of the kidney, and the tubules in the kidney, you start seeing that. So the interference or the destruction of the glomerulus is what causes the protein to be released in the urine. When I was in college, they used to tell us, and this is a long time ago, but normal urine should look like champagne, clear and the slight tint of yellow. So that was what I can remember from there. So it's ever cloudy, it's not a good sign. So the reproductive system, as I mentioned, testicular necrosis. So that in the adult males or in males, you start seeing interference of spermatogenesis or even production of testosterone. It has as I mentioned, it has an estrogen side effect. So it does affect steroid hormone synthesis. So that would be the ovarian production of steroid hormones, which would be the progesterone, estradiol, and in the male would be production of testosterone and androstenedione. And again, in the skeletal system, you would see loss in density of the bone, which is, there's a disease called Itai disease, which is very common in Japan because there are areas which are high in cadmium. So you see that it's quite common there. It has been shown that it has been classified as a carcinogen. The International Agency for Research on Cancer decided to classify cadmium as a human carcinogen. And there are many fields of further study of occupational medicine and toxicology in which cadmium is currently suspected to play a major role. And then latest studies have been proven to importance of the reduction of cadmium emissions for human health. Cadmium is an example of an industrial use substance with negative long-term effects, and that's because it isn't readily excreted by the body. It does stay around for a long time once you've been exposed to it, so it's quite nasty. There's renal tubular dysfunction. That's the part I mentioned where the glomerulus starts breaking down, and you start seeing protein in your urine, and that's the proteinuria. And it's generally accepted the main effect of long-term, low-level exposure of cadmium. So if you've worked with it, or you've been exposed to it over a long period of time, then it doesn't have to be a high level. It's just a cumulative effect. And there is sufficient evidence to regard cadmium as a suspect in renal and prostate cancer. Exposure of heavy metals can affect human health, both directly or indirectly by disrupting ecological systems. So it has an effect in the environment on, for example, any animals or in the ponds or around the ponds or anywhere where the cadmium has been dumped. So it says rivers, lakes, ocean streams, wetlands, estuaries, and other ecosystems. So it can affect a broad scope of all the ecosystems once it's come in contact with that. It is known that cadmium input to the aquatic environment through discharge of industrial waste service, runoff, and deposition of cadmium is strongly absorbed onto sediments and soil. So again, it not only stays in the human body, but it does stick around once the soil or the water is contaminated. It's not readily washed out or got rid of, so it does stay around for a long time. And then again, there's another source, phosphate fertilizer, burning coal, iron alloy steel and cement, disposing of household items represent a major source of cadmium release to the aquatic ecosystem. Cadmium can easily enter the body by food chain, drinking water, smoking cigarettes, or even breathing the air. So if you're in an environment where cadmium is a contaminant, it's very easily to get it into your body. Acute exposure or chronic exposure to cadmium, both in human and animals, results in health and diseases. Cadmium was classified as a human carcinogen under the EPA 1996 cancer guidelines. It was observed that cadmium has caused kidney disease, kidney cancer, severely irritated the stomach, the lining of the stomach, vomiting and diarrhea, sometimes even sudden death. So it potentially has fatal effects. Furthermore, recent data suggested that increased cancer risk and increased mortality in environmentally exposed population. So, questions? Anyone? I hope I didn't go too fast, but I didn't want to hold you all up too long after what happened just now. Do you want me to go over anything again or review anything?
So, Adrian, yeah. I was just amazed at your presentation to find that this cadmium, which is in OU3 and in OU1, and I suppose in OU2.
It's a huge plume. Chuck should is Chuck still here? The plume that stretches from, what is it, south of I-70, southwest of I-70, all the way up to northeast I-70, up to from I-70 to 51st. It's a massive plume of cadmium.
Right. They also found cadmium in OU1, but for some reason that Earth Justice quoted in their comments to EPA on the delisting, EPA had some issue or problem or whatever, and so they just didn't pursue the cadmium there. But apparently it is there too. So that was an amazing presentation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I'd be happy to see if I can.
I have a small question. How do you how do you find out that you have this cadmium inside of you, like without it being too late?
Yeah, good question. You can actually have it measured. I don't know. It's going to be a special test. They're not going to do this as a routine test, but it can be readily measured in your blood. And again, this is an area I don't know how the insurance would cover that, but you can certainly get a measurement, blood and urine, and they will give you, the values. It'll be micrograms per, liter or micrograms per mil. But that's, you're right. That's a good question, and it's something that, we should have, the people of GES, certainly Global, should be being monitored. I know we have before my time. I've only lived here 20 years, but I know I've heard people say that, studies have been done over the years for cadmium and lead and zinc and a lot of the metals, because it's used extensively in the foundries. So I believe that it has been measured in plasma of adults and children for GES. And I think it should be an ongoing thing. I think people should be monitored continuously to see how the levels, and I think the soil in the houses should be measured as well, because it's not going away, that's for sure. But a good question, thank you.
Yeah, I think that should be some kind of a routine thing, because some of the things that you are mentioning that happens to the body as this contaminant travels through. I remember having my older son having protein in his urine there for a while, and we had no clue like what it was for, what it was. And that was, I don't know, maybe about 5 years ago. And I mean, I live in Swansea, as you guys all know, so it's just a concern. It's a very bad concern. I don't know what to do. I've suffered with my kidneys my whole life, stomach issues. I have them all over the place. So it's like, wait a minute. Well, now what do I need to do? Go to the doctor and ask them to check for cadmium inside of me?
Yeah, it wouldn't be a bad idea to see if you can get your levels checked and what the results are. It should be something that, they are studies, the groups, the GES groups, and I think you're part of the health study. They're trying to gather the data for all the studies that have been done in GES over the years, and they're trying to combine them together, and so that they can be some statistical analysis can be done on them to show that the presentation of the data of the levels that have occurred in the population of GES, and see if there's any changes. I don't know the last time that they did any measurements here. I think it's been several years or maybe more, but my way of thinking is they should be done again.
I agree with you.
So Adrian, I have a question. Would a regular doctor's office even know to test for cadmium?
I think you'd have to,
because
you'd
they
have to
test for
ask.
everything else, and would it cost more because for many of us, we have to pay for our own blood work.
Yeah, and that's the sad part. You know, unless there can be a study done to show specifically the levels of cadmium and lead in GES. If you go to a doctor's office, he can certainly request it. It can certainly be done. I mean, they're going to have to send it out to it'll be a special test, but you know, they're going to come back and it's going to be a billable test, and that's the unfortunate thing. Unless, of course, we can come back and have a study, as I mentioned, and a new study to show the current levels of cadmium for the population in these neighborhoods. And I think that's something that, you know, we should seriously consider getting done.
If I can raise my hand,
Sure.
I think that there is supposed to be a health study that's being set up through the courts because of Earth Justice winning a lawsuit on something. And perhaps it's not too late to ask that they do some cadmium studies. I just say that. Angela, are you on that committee?
Yes, I am. And actually what that study is going to do, it's not going to do any new studies. It's not going to do any new testing. It is specifically to review all the data that has been accumulated over the decades and to, actually I wrote notes down, see if I can read my notes, and to do a comparison study. I think that's what that says. And yeah, so it's not going to do anything new. It's just going to review all the old data that has been accumulated over the decades.
I don't know if you have any clout. Can you get them to expand it a little bit for cadmium testing?
It's already written and done.
Oh, okay. That kills that one, but maybe we can figure out some other ways. So that,
Well, I actually was on a call a few weeks ago, environmental injustice, and it was with somebody from CSU, and I don't know if I'll be able to find my notes, but I did tell her about the CAG, and she said, is there anything that we can do to assist with, assist GES? And I did tell her about the CAG. I would need to do more investigation into my notes to find out what her name is and share that with you all. But she sounded like she'd be willing to help us.
well, I might add one more piece. Jesse Aviles, I believe you said you were waiting for some funding to come through. Is that what you said? In order to do what? Can you help me remember?
We're doing a feasibility study, so we're waiting on funds to perform it. One thing that is missing from this is about exposure. There is a cadmium plume in groundwater, but it is in groundwater. And the area is served not but from the groundwater, but from Denver water. So no one is drinking the water, no one is contacting the water.
Okay, so we don't know that the cadmium would be coming from the plume. Is there any place else the cadmium would be coming from?
Let me expand upon this a little bit. Back in the 1996, 97, there was actually a health study done in the Sarco globe, and cadmium was one of the metals concerned because the Sarco had produced cadmium from like 1909 to 1926 to about 1980. But there's small different ways they were doing it, very high purity metal stuff. We had approximately 1,000 people who were tested, children, adults, and they were tested before the remediation of the property was done and afterwards. And if I recall the data correctly, and the problem is this is a paper format, so I don't have a copy of it. There's only a handful of people that had elevated level of cadmium. And of those people, 4 out of the 5 were heavy smokers, which is attributable to elevated levels of cadmium because of pesticides and herbicides they use in the tobacco industry. And they did have one child that was slightly elevated, but they could not determine the cause of it because there was not elevated levels of cadmium in the yard. So they weren't sure where the source of cadmium came from. But as part of the Esophageal Globe cleanup, we went yard to yard over the entire property. Didn't matter if your property was clean or dirty, you got a brand new yard. They took a foot of soil out, replaced it with a foot of soil. The cadmium plume that came from the airborne deposition dropped off very significantly. The reason being is that cadmium is a large metal, is a heavy metal, and the way they produce it and it hits the smokestacks, it drops off much smoother than arsenic does or lead does. So basically, within a 6 blocks radius of the site, 95% of the plume had already dropped out into the soils. And those were areas that were cleaned up. As far as elevated levels of cadmium and OU1, I do not believe that is correct. There may have been cadmium in the groundwater, but I don't believe there was cadmium in the soil at an elevated level to attribute to that. So before people decide to take extensive tests, I would really caution just the fact that I do not believe there's a source in OU2 because the Omaha grant never produced cadmium. It was strictly a lead smelter. And if there was a certain amount of contaminants of cadmium in the metals, it was a very minute amount. So I'm not going to tell people what to do or what not to do, but if you are at OU1, especially not in the Esophageal Globe area, I would say that, in my opinion, that especially if it's going to cost you a lot of money out of pocket, I would not go down that path.
Angela, are you still trying to say something? Is that
I actually found her name. It is, sure, I found it. Her name is Parker McMullen Bushman, and she is with the Denver Extension Office for CSU. And Fran and Bridget, I will get her information to you and we can set up a meeting with her. She had said that she could grab some data for us to look at.
sounds like a winner? Okay, we will move in that direction.
So Fonda, the reason that we said that there was cadmium in OU1 was from, I believe, a document from 1998, was an EPA document that said, and I can send you the source, that said that they did find cadmium in OU1, but there was some difficulty. I don't know if it was with testing or whatever, and they just decided not to proceed, not to pursue it. So we're just, at this point, we're just trying to gather facts. We're just trying to gather the science. We're just trying to put together a picture. And you're very helpful, and thank you very much.
And I understand that. I just want to make sure people understand that cadmium was not a major source in OU1, and that I believe that it would be, before you start spending a bunch of money, it would, the numbers were not there.
Can I just say, I did put a presentation together prior to this one. I can, if you got time, I can pull up the slides to show the cadmium levels for global, especially if you have time.
Yeah, those were cleaned up though. Those have all been cleaned up though. All those properties.
Okay.
That's all.
I believe we're almost out of time. So perhaps if no one else has any other questions, I mean, I've got almost 7:30. So I would think we should just call it quits for tonight. And I thank everyone.
Yeah,
Hold on 1 second.
very
1 second.
informative.
Thank you
I-
for your
1
patience as
second.
well.
Okay, hold on.
I
One
have a-
something.
I
Rachel,
have
go.
a- I have a question. So on Thursday and Friday, I'll be meeting with Hickenlooper, DeGette, and Bennett with the Green Latinos. And we are all charged with communicating with them from the groups that we are part of. And so if anyone has anything, and I'll put my email in the chat for you. If anyone has anything that you, no, I can't. I don't know, the chat's not working right now. That they would like me to raise to any of those individuals, please let me know. I am definitely a vessel for you all, and just let me know if there's any particular issues I should be raising.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone who wants to mark your calendar, we're doing an Earth Day celebration in GES on April 24th. And we will be starting in Globeville, and we will be going through Elyria, and we will be ending up in Swansea. And our whole thing is just to celebrate our Earth. I don't think we're looking for all the problems at that time. We're just saying that we will do what we can to take care of our Mother Earth. So anyone who's interested, let me know. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Okay, everyone. Good evening.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Next time. Hasta luego.
Thank you, Fran.
Okay. Thank you, Angela. Take care.
Bye.
Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.